everyone. Welcome back to the MIKU Podcast, Melt into Korea with us. I'm your host, Alex. If you're new today, welcome. And on part 3 of the MIKU Podcast, we are doing a human library podcast, introducing foreigners who have made a positive impact on Korean history. In the first episode, we introduced Mary Scranton. For the second, it was Henry Appenzeller. And now, for the third episode, we will discuss about the very first Protestant missionary in Korea, Horace Allen. So to join me today for today's episode, let's welcome Holly Hanger.
Hi, everyone. My name is Holly. It's so nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, hi, Holly. It's really nice to see you bright and early this morning. And actually, I really want to welcome you because throughout our series, you are the only American guest, besides me being the MC. So really welcome. Can you give us maybe just a short introduction about yourself?
Well, I'm 25, and I've lived in Korea since 2018. Mm-hmm. And I currently live here as a part-time journalism and language instructor. And I also study political science full-time. I originally came as a student and scholarship winner of Teach and Learn in Korea, also known as the TALK program. Mm-hmm. And I kind of just haven't left yet.
That's really awesome to hear. And just kind of curious, what kind of drew you into doing this podcast with us? What your interest in history or, getting to know Korean a little bit more?
Actually, I'm planning on applying for Yonsei next year after I finish my bachelor program in political science because I want to study there in international relations and general world communication.
Yeah, that's amazing. So maybe, hopefully, for that, you probably need some history background, and this might be a good opportunity for you.
I thought it would look great on the Yonsei application, not going to lie. But also, I've always been interested in Korean history and culture. So it was super interesting to get a chance to do something like this to even learn more myself about American history inside Korea.
Yeah, I think America and Korea has a very deep history. So I think it's good to reflect back on it. It's not something normal we talk about in daily conversation. So it also, for me personally, gives us a chance to really dig deeper into, not just this one person, but later it gets us rolling in our interests to learn more.
Absolutely.
So again, I want to say, because we have so many diverse guests and to have a fellow American here today, it's really awesome. It feels like I'm from Jersey, so back in Jersey, just talking to a friend. And I wanted to get to talking about, kind of a notable person, an American, right, from our native country, Horace Allen, and his achievements, as well as his positive influence on Korean history. So as we dive into it, just wanted to ask you, do you know anything about Horace Allen before or after, getting to prepare for this podcast?
Actually, I do know some things, but I'm super excited to, expand on that knowledge. The basic things I already know is that he was the founder of the first Western medical center in Korea. And I've read several historical documents and records about him, about his missionary work, and about different things that he went through, different struggles he faced, specifically bringing his family over to a less, I suppose, modern Korea. It must have been very difficult for him.
I think anyone coming as a foreigner going to Korea, just like us or like Horace back then, it's always a weird transition. It's a struggle, right? Getting familiar with new people, language, food, everything.
Absolutely. Culture shock was very real for me as well, but it was so much easier with the introduction of the internet.
Yes.
So I imagine coming over here without the internet, it must have been so hard for him.
So different.
And traveling as well. 23-hour flights don't seem so bad.
Exactly. It's completely different time period. And even though Korea has changed so much from then, I don't even know if I had, traveled back in time and we already know, what had happened, what to expect. It still would have been hard, right, to live in that time period. So, as you had mentioned, with his family and his achievements, I see that you've prepared a lot for today. So we will also touch a little bit on the first Western modernized hospital called Gwangheywon. So I'll get started. We'll do some basic facts about Horace Newton Allen. So first of all, he was born in a Christian family in Delaware, Ohio in 1858. And after receiving his Bachelor of Science, he studied medicine in Cincinnati. He then requested to be a missionary just before graduation. And as he became a doctor, he was sent to China as a missionary and arrived to China in 1883. So even though he went to a different country, still a Eastern country before Korea, it wasn't what he expected. So since there were already many established missionaries, it was hard for him to find his own position. Additionally, he could not get situated with life in China. So after 1 year, he accepted his colleague's recommendation to go to Korea, or back then the name was Chosun.
Well, building on that, as a missionary, he could not come to Korea and just freely say, oh, hi, I'm Christian, please become a Christian,
right.
So instead, he entered Korea as a physician, affiliated in the U.S. legation, and worked by taking care of foreigners inside Joseon. So I think we should talk about his life in Korea from a missionary to a physician, but also including the fact that he was a diplomat.
Right. So he had a mission, which was to spread Christianity, but because he had to kind of hide that identity, it's even harder as like going to a foreign country and trying to be yourself and adapt to the cultures and the traditions and the people. But his inner motive, he had to completely pretend that wasn't even him.
I think it might have been very difficult at certain points, but it was the only way he could carry out his actual mission in Korea, which was to serve as a missionary, So I think because he kept his missionary career hidden and continued to work as a physician, it led him to great connections, even connections that may have helped him complete his mission and fulfill his goals during that time. For example, he ended up saving the life of Min, a royal relative, through Western medical techniques. The cousin of King Gojong was actually sliced or stabbed like 7 times with a sword.
He would nearly died then, right? There's no saving him.
They were almost fatal. He ended up saving the life of Min, a royal relative, through Western medical techniques. This person was stabbed or sliced 7 times with a sword.
Oh my God.
So these wounds were not exactly basic or surface, right? So he gained recognition of the Korean king, King Gojong, and eventually proposed to build a Western-style medical center or hospital where he would treat patients without receiving compensation. Eventually, he would also go on to give medical education to students in Joseon.
I see. So I guess by fate, from that one incident of treating a royal family member, he was able to build that connection with the king and then eventually request the king to build a Western-style hospital. And I just want to go back to him saving that royal family member. And as you said, there were huge, deep stabs. He probably wouldn't have survived, any longer than a day. And then for them to be able to say, okay, you're a Western doctor. Let's see what you can do. Let's see if you can save him. And they allowed him to do so. I think that was also maybe Joseon's kind of breaking point, saying, okay, we're going to allow different practices, because maybe back then it wasn't very safe to do that.
Right. I think that there may have been a point where they realized, okay, the medical knowledge we have is not enough to go this far. Right. We don't have the technology to fix this, so we might as well take a chance and try. Like, we know this doesn't work, so maybe.
And I think it is thanks to King Gojong. He's the one that kind of allowed the modernization of international thinking processes. So if without him allowing that, he could have been a king that said, no, we're going to keep to our traditions, we're not going to modernize anything. But him being open-minded and allowing this, Horus really was able to make that connection. I think they probably modernized a lot of things, not just medicine, but education later. So I think King Gojong is definitely worth mentioning in this situation.
Absolutely. I think monarchs, just people in power in general, have a very long history throughout the world of being very basic and my idea kind of focused, you know? So I think that King Gojong showing this much appreciation and respect and open-mindedness, as you said, about a new medical technology is very telling of the king that he was and the advancements that came through him.
Right.
So, anyways, going back to Allen. He originally came to Joseon with the purpose of being a missionary, but his career as a physician, I think it played a huge role in the achievements he made later as well.
Exactly. So, actually, if we compare Korean style or, Eastern style medicine and switching to Western, wasn't it quite difficult to all of a sudden say, okay, we're going to switch over and try this new style? You're putting people's lives at risk. So this is definitely something that they had to think about very deeply.
Well, at the time, the Joseon government was already planning to accept new culture from various countries, including Western-style medicine once international trading started to expand. So the timing for Allen was really good, as the government was already getting ready to accept those types of changes anyway. This just presented a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him to insert himself into that position.
And as we talked about, it's probably a huge influence was King Gojong, right?
Absolutely.
And probably his, it's like his supporters, they listened to him and they understood him as a king to really bring their civilization up to a different level instead of keep living the way Joseon was. And for that first Western hospital that had came up, back when Horus had made it, it is, what I read, it is now the current Yonsei Severance Hospital in Shincheon.
Oh, so you have heard about it, right? So have you ever gone into it or received any medical? Can I ask about that?
Yeah, you can ask about it. No worries.
Have you ever received any medical treatment from there? Have you ever gone inside?
So the reason why I'm almost positive I would never have heard of this hospital, or I knew of Yonsei because it's a university.
Of course.
But when I first came to Korea last year, I actually lived in Shincheon. So whenever I was walking back and forth from home to the subway or anywhere else, I always passed by it. But I actually never got a chance to go in it, and especially during that time, the cases were not that great then, so I had to avoid it maybe even.
So I think it's a really good thing that you didn't need to go into the hospital for any medical emergencies or, the current pandemic situation.
Yeah.
But I think that hospital carries a lot of history for paving the road for Western modern medicine in Korea. Actually, before it became Yonsei Severance Hospital, it was named Gwangheywon.
Okay. So actually, when we were talking about Western versus Eastern medicine, there are all different kind of styles from maybe the medicine, the practices, the treatment. And I was wondering, which styles have you tried, or which ones would you expand on, the differences between those two?
Well, I think the main difference that I feel personally here in Korea is the spirit of the medical practice.
Oh, wow. Okay. So nothing technical, but the doctors themselves, maybe? What do you mean spirit? That's interesting.
So in America, physicians tend to only look at the symptoms of a specific disease or problem, right? And how it presents itself as a constant, non-changing entity. Symptoms don't really change much from person to person.
Okay.
But in Korea, I think a lot of physicians like to focus on the symptoms, but also on the spirit of the person. And they try to see how the disease specifically affects that person as an individual rather than only treating the disease. I feel like they treat the person as a whole
what's going
more.
on in that person's life might be affecting their health, maybe?
Right. It's not just their medical history, but it's what is your lifestyle now? How is your morale? All of these different things affect how the disease affects that person.
I see.
Where I
Okay.
think America looks more at only the symptoms themselves.
Only the analyzation of that patient at that current time and how they're doing
Yes.
in America. And I also think, the way that you talk about the spirit, it might be because of the influence of Eastern medicine, right? So in America, you don't see a lot of Eastern medicine because America is westernized country. So you mainly only see the westernized styles. And then once in a while, small shops from immigrants, you'll see some Eastern styles in America. But in countries like Asian countries, specifically Korea, its root is Eastern, but then it brings in the modernization of Western. So combining these two, I think that's why the practice is so different. It has the positive influences of both Eastern and Western, and that's how it kind of makes its own kind of medical style.
Absolutely. Even when Korean physicians use Western medical techniques, I feel like they take the concept of jung, or like, I don't know how to explain this in English.
Affection.
But like
yeah.
a general affection or
Yeah.
compassion. It's a very Korean idea, but I feel
Right.
like they take a lot of this jung and like put it into their medical techniques.
I think that's completely true. And we can say that Horus, right? He had that for the Korean people.
Absolutely.
Right? When you were mentioning about making the hospital and free of charge, basically, don't pay me. I just have this affection for Korean people. And I want to make a medical school and don't pay me. I want to teach these people because I have affection. I want to help Korea advance into that.
And I specifically want to mention, too, that when he was saying, don't pay me, I would just want to treat people, he wasn't only talking about like the royal family. He was talking about just the common people in general, which I think is a really telling point for him as well.
That's a really good point because I think for him to get as high as the king, the highest standard of living, not highest standard of living, I meant like the person with the most power. Once he got to that point, he uses that to his advantage and then spread that out to, the next level, maybe just rich people, and then maybe really scholars, and then to the common, and then to the poor. So, starting from the bottom to the up, it'll be a much longer, harder journey. But once he made that connection with King Gojong, then he was able to help other common Korean people.
Absolutely, like using that socioeconomic status to
but for
like
good.
reach out,
not
and
to climb the ladder though, for
exactly.
good though. Right?
Like he like achieved that, and he's like, okay, great, now we're just gonna share it.
Yeah.
So I think it was really great.
He's really admirable for doing that. I guess we should just touch up a little bit on, our personal experience. Have you been to Yonsei Severance Hospital by any chance? Or
I have not been to that hospital.
Okay.
I actually lived in Jeonju for
Oh, wow.
2.5, 3 years.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've, of course, been to several medical centers there. As for individual, like, Eastern-style medicine practices, I'm really excited to try acupuncture. I've heard
I'm scared
so
of that.
many good things.
I'm kind of scared of needles, but I've heard, like you said, so many good things. Like, it relieves a lot of not only pain, but, like, stress too, like something mentally. I have no idea. So, like, what do you know about that, and why do you want to do it?
Okay, this is gonna sound really, really childish of me, I think. But I have been watching Avatar: The Last Airbender for like the 6th time.
There's acupuncture in there?
No, but there's like a lot of like Eastern themes, like an Eastern medical themes inside it.
Okay.
And it's made me, like, they focus a lot on chi. I'm not sure the Korean word for this, but like the different pressure points and like how it connects to like the spiritual healing. And I think that like first got me interested in it, and then living here has kind of amplified that desire to have a first experience of acupuncture or Eastern medical practices actually in East Asia.
Yeah.
Because I think
it'll be different, right? Doing
Absolutely.
acupuncture in Korea versus back in the U.S., it'll be like a different style. I mean, it's still the same, but by a different doctor with probably more experience in Korea.
Exactly.
I guess.
And they've learned it in a very traditional way. Maybe I have some idea in my head, but I specifically want to go to like maybe an elderly person who does it, who actually learned in a non-modern facility.
No influences from Western culture, right?
I want to go somewhere, and I go in, and they just have never seen a foreigner before.
And, they don't know what to do. They're standstill. Like, they're like, so how do I talk to you?
Exactly.
That kind of situation. Okay.
Exactly. Maybe have a completely different dialect. That,
right.
You know.
So I think for our viewers and for our listeners, it seems like Holly really encourages other people to try this. I'm a little self-conscious about it because I don't like needles, but one day I think if I build up the confidence, I would try acupuncture as well.
Well, there are other types of Eastern medical practices too. Okay. Acupuncture is not the only one. One I find really interesting.
So for our viewers and our listeners, Holly definitely recommends acupuncture. She's so excited to tell us about it. I'm sure that it will probably relieve a lot of pain or stress. I'm still a little reluctant because I'm afraid of needles, but one day I will try it.
Well, if needles aren't really your thing, you could always go for a Korean style of like massage.
Okay.
So when I first came to Korea, I wanted to get a chiropractor because I had been seeing one in America for a while for an old shoulder injury.
All right.
And I found that it's illegal here.
Really? Like, isn't that needed for your back and your bones and stuff like that? Like,
you have to go to like a very specific specialist for them to do like a spine realignment, but it is not considered chiropractic.
I see.
Chiropractic.
It's just not allowed. It's illegal. That's the first time I've ever heard. So if you have really huge back problems coming to Korea looking for a chiropractor, you have to look a different word, right? A different practice.
Completely different practice.
Okay.
Like chiroplasty was made illegal a long time ago, actually. So, I was very shocked. And unless you want to go to like a super expensive medical center and get like an actual physician who has, 8 or 10 years of medical school behind them and all this, you have to like go for like a Korean massage instead.
But it's similar though, right? They probably like align your back or something at the massage, or
they don't
just
crack it.
They don't crack it.
Like the cracking of your body is what is specifically like illegal.
Oh, but that's so refreshing though. That's like that's what gets you started for your day. So I didn't know that was so westernized that it's considered illegal here.
Yeah, they find it very dangerous. Like in what I've read, of course, I don't have any academic source that I can back this up with, but based on what I've read, they find it very dangerous to play with like the neck and spine area.
See. It's a risk that you might.
And I think America has so much history with it that they're just like, whatever.
Right.
But Korea finds that one a little too maybe invasive.
I guess so.
Because it is so risky right here.
Yeah, it's a sensitive part right at the neck. So if they do something wrong, then you're putting your patient on their deathbed maybe at a certain point. I see. So I guess massage is another option, but then personally, I don't like being touched a lot, so that's out for me.
Well, then I guess you're out of luck with the ones we've discussed.
Right.
Oh, something else I wanted to touch on too, though, because it has such a big difference, is oral medication.
Okay.
So the strength of medications here in comparison to America is so different. Like, it's super easy in America to get a strong pain medication, but those normal medications in America are often illegal here, specifically like opioids, even like post-operation.
Like pain relievers.
Yes, pain relievers are almost impossible to get here, and most of them are illegal.
Or maybe I've heard as well that the medicine here is maybe like a weaker dose. So that's how they control the system. And I guess if we have to talk back maybe about more traditional ways in Korea, the medicine was herbal medicine, right? It was from trees and plants and maybe even like animals, whatever, to make that kind of tonic, that medicine. And because that's naturally processed, it's possible that they lower the doses compared to westernized medicine. It's not as strong. It's possible that has some connection with it.
I definitely think so. America has been able to process certain chemicals for a little longer than Korea has been able to. So I think that we've, as Americans, have just had some more exposure to processed medications.
Kind of advanced technologies and longer history of medical advances.
Right. So I think people are just more willing to play with stronger substances or stronger doses of those substances in America than Korea.
But then also I can understand the controlling of that just in case, because they do that, and probably compared to America probably has a higher kind of abusive medical history, right? People will take advantage of that. So in a way, it kind of lessens that ratio here in Korea by lowering those doses.
I definitely think it does bring down the access levels of those different medications. So, there's pros and cons to both sides of it. But yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting difference there.
We touched up on, the beginning with acupuncture, different practice style, along with no chiropractors in Korea. And also oral medication is very different compared to America and Korea. And actually, you mentioned this a little bit earlier off camera, but injections, what about that? Like, I haven't been to a hospital or a doctor here yet, but, usually injections are for flu or for a virus, cases like that. What's your experience with that here?
About 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, not to be TMI, but I had a really bad
what
rash.
You want to share. You don't have to tell us everything.
I'm okay sharing everything. That's fine. But I had this really red, bumpy rash across my entire body.
Ouch.
Literally across all of my face, my hands, feet,
concerning.
And everywhere in between. And I was kind of worried because it was there for 2 or 3 days, and I'm just like, okay, this isn't going away. I teach children. Is this transmittable?
Yeah, if it's contagious, you have to protect yourself and them.
Right. So I went to the hospital, and they were like, okay, we're going to give you some antibiotics. I'm like, cool, great. Okay, awesome. So they gave me this little packet of pills and a little paper bag thing. And then they're like, we're also going to give you an injection. So I'm like, great, okay, here you go. And handed in my arm. And they're like, oh, no, please pull down your pants. I'm just like, excuse me. What?
Is that? I guess that's the normal way they do it here. Did you ask them, like, why not here and here? Did you question them, or just like, okay, just do it, go with the flow kind of thing?
I didn't, because at the time I spoke no Korean. I understood no Korean, nothing. So they were just like, lay down here. Oh, that was really loud. I'm so sorry. So anyways, the nurse was just like, oh, lay down right here. And I was like, okay. So I lay down, and they're like, oh, show me your hips. So I was like, okay, why? You want to see the rash? Okay. So I pulled it down so they could see the rash. And then she just takes a needle and she smacks my butt like this, and then just stabs me. And I'm just like,
oh my goodness. So it just came at you. There was no
no warning.
Nothing. There's no prequel, okay, well, please get ready. It's going to sting a little. It's just, bam. I guess they want to get you out of there or something. They just did it right away. Okay.
I mean, Jeonju's kind of rural. Maybe they're not used to foreigners, but
maybe.
But I thought she just wanted to see the rash, see how far it was, and
then injection on the buttocks right there. Yeah, I don't know. I've never experienced something like that unless, I think you had mentioned too, when we were really young, babies, infants, they had the injections on our butts. But nowadays, that's just not practiced in Western culture or from our hometowns where we're from. And was that the only time? I'm really curious. Now I want to ask my Korean friends, is that normal or not?
Well, I immediately went and asked all of my friends.
Yeah,
I'm like, guys,
what'd you find out?
She stabbed me in the butt. I don't know what I should do. Yeah. And they're like, no, it's fine. It's normal. That's normal. Very average. It was for an antibiotic shot. You had a allergic reaction, right?
And I'm better that way? In the butt? And especially because you sit down in that area, so you're always putting pressure on that area. Right. But here, maybe you just not use your left arm a lot, and it's okay. But in your butt, you have to stand up if it's sore or anything like that.
Right. I got a COVID vaccination, and those shots were all in my arm, completely normal. Like I was like, okay, great, here you go. Like,
not in your butt,
right?
So.
But the allergic reaction that I had was treated with a shot in my butt, which was really weird. Because again, like you said, the last time I got a shot in my butt or my leg was when I was an infant, like less than 2. Absolutely.
Actually, it's funny that you talk about injections, for the vaccine or, for your allergic reaction antibiotics. And if we continue to talk about medicine and injections and surgery and whatnot, Korea has a huge influence on plastic surgery now, right? Or injections and Botox in the face or in the body. So it's really interesting to see that they've adapted to Western culture in that ways too, for cosmetic reasons, not just for medical or physical.
Absolutely. I think Korea is very open to certain things. Like when they're open to something, they're very open to it, right?
It's a huge market now, so it's booming.
Absolutely. So I think they grew a lot in this type of area,
especially,
and accepted a lot of different things and kind of just grew with it.
And we talked about from traditional medicines back when King Gojong was, king of Joseon, and with Horus back then, and to up till now, which is injections in the butt or no chiropractors, but acupuncture is still widely used, using both Eastern and both Korean and Western styles of medicine together, best of both sides, and up to. Basically, plastic surgery is a huge market now for Korean market. If we go back to that time period, if we were, or if you or I were, as a civilian back in Joseon, we've only known Korean practices for all our lives. And bringing in a very foreign and Western style of medicine, would you be willing to try this? I'll go first because if I had to say, if I was then, it was very traditional and very used to one way of life the whole time. At first, I think I would not be open. I'd be very scared. It's putting my own life at risk. But then if I had a life-threatening disease, or if I was stabbed 7 times like that royal member, and I had really no choice, I think at that point, I would be willing to try anything. And I think at that opportunity with that royal family, that was the same situation. And it was successful, thankfully. If it wasn't, I can't imagine what Horus would have done. But because he was successful, that's how Western medicine became openly more acceptable. So what do you think you would do?
Well, honestly, I think it has a lot to do with age and exposure. As we talked about, this relative of the king was... he was related to the king, very closely, right? It wasn't 6 marriages down the line, right? So I think he had a lot of exposure to different cultures and other people just because of his position. So I think he may have been a little more open to it than just a regular...
common citizens.
Citizen, right. Yeah. So I think after seeing this very high up receive medical treatment from a Westerner and that spreads, I think that opened the door, right? If a Western hospital had just happened, I don't think anybody would have really went, right? But after hearing, hey, this high up was saved from death by this foreigner using Western medical practices, I think Korea became a lot more open to it because of that.
Right. Completely agree with that.
I think they were scared anyway, just because it was very new. For example, a lot of medical procedures are done where other people may be able to see it here in Korea, which is very strange to me. And it kind of freaks me out. Dentistry is the hardest thing for me here because they just have you out in the hallway where people can see you, and they put this little paper bag thing across your body and just has your face open. I'm just this freaks me out. So thinking back to them having no exposure at all, it must have been so terrifying for them to try this new thing, even with that knowledge, you know?
Yeah, I can't imagine because it's just so difficult. As I said, I would be scared to. I would be scared to try it, especially, it's not like, oh, it's different culture food, different culture fashion, or like different culture makeup. Like, it's not something simple like that. We're talking about medical procedures, and
it's your life.
For us to eventually kind of influence and in a way kind of, how would I say, his persuasive ways. But it's not just that. He proved, right? He had factual actions that he did to kind of get people's opinions to change about Western medicine.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, people are going to be curious about it. And I think that uncomfortable curiosity about Allen and his different procedures is a large part of what made that transition hard, you know? But, like, I think it became easier for them, but I still think it was incredibly hard, especially for older people who were so used to their own kinds of medical
older
treatments.
People they don't change their mind very easily. They're not young people who are like, they haven't experienced a lot and opening willingness to try new things. But older people, they have lived for so long with like a history of one way that it's very hard to change their opinions. So.
Right, they're like, this works, and I never need something different.
Yeah, why should I do something? So after talking about all these different kind of practices with Korean medical and versus Western medical, when he eventually made his hospital requested to King Kojong, how did he come up with this establishment after speaking with King Kojong?
Well, as we mentioned, King Kojong was already in a place to really accept like transitions into Western practices. Right. So I think it went pretty smoothly after that time. And even later, like after 1 year of establishing Gwangheywon, the first Western modernized hospital, Allen went on to start a medical education facility, which was like his vision from the beginning.
Right. So, him making his own hospital, well, not his own hospital, but making a Western-styled hospital and eventually leading to a medical school, that shows a lot of ambition for him as a foreigner coming to Korea and establishing these two.
I don't think it just shows ambition, though. Like, it goes beyond that. Like, as a doctor, he genuinely cared for his patients. Again, like, he didn't accept any compensation for doing this. And even at the hospital, he noticed there was some discrimination between status, like socioeconomic status, and the sexes. In terms of discrimination in status, there were separate institutions for the royal family and like commoners or common people. However, he treated people with equality regardless of their class, regardless of the compensation that he might have been able to receive. Like, although he was attending physician to King Kojong, he also gave medical treatment to just common citizens as well.
That you can see the philanthropy kind of mindset he had for all these people. And how was that discrimination between sexes?
Well, Horace realized there were no female patients. And it wasn't because women weren't allowed to receive medical treatment from him, but because of the Confucian customs at the time, women felt very uncomfortable being treated by a male physician. They were very reluctant to, show their bodies in whatever manner to a strange foreign male doctor, right? So the stigma was very prevalent at that time, I think. Therefore, he requested the Board of Foreign Mission to send a female physician as well as a separate ward, so that females could be treated and cared for properly by someone they felt comfortable being with.
I feel like his actions spoke very loudly, and his opinions and quality of personality really showed. And I also felt like he didn't have to do that, right? Like, he didn't have to request to the missionary board, hey, excuse me, but, women are shy, and because of the practices here, they don't feel comfortable to going to this hospital because there's no other female doctors. Right. But he went out of his way, and he wanted to make sure that women had the chance to be able to have that service when they needed it, especially if they were on the verge of dying, like they had a terrible disease, but because that it was a foreign male doctor, they just didn't feel right going in. And for that kind of reason, to not be treated is just, outrageous for him to think, right? So that's why he took that action. He went out of his way, requested a female doctor, made sure that they were being able to treat it comfortably, which I think is very admirable.
With a lot of privacy and respect,
Right, yeah.
I think it would have been very easy for him to say, oh, just come with your husband, come with your father, come with, whatever male
Giving
you
another
feel comfortable
excuse
with.
or reason, right?
Right, but he literally was like, okay, full stop, they need a woman.
Yeah.
They need a female doctor. Let's get one who's trained in this.
Exactly. That's definitely something we can see, that he was very compassionate for people's well-being.
Right, and he didn't wait to train a Korean doctor either, right? Like, he was like, okay, well, we're going to get one right now because we need it now. They need it now. Right. So I think that was very telling, as you said. And since he established that first Western medical hospital, I think his actions, both medically and as a humanitarian, I think it really paved the way for other Western medical facilities to come to Korea.
Definitely. I definitely agree, because if it wasn't for him first building that hospital, then the medical institution to educate others, along with bringing a female doctor, Korea wouldn't have been able to develop their modern medicine to it is now. It would have been, without him, I can't imagine, maybe just not as advanced, right? It would still be back, maybe not back then, but just not as advanced as now.
Absolutely. I think the collaboration between Horus and Kim Go-jung was so instrumental and influential at this time because Eastern traditional medicine, specifically like in Korea, like Korean traditional medicine and Western medicine are different even now, but especially at that time, they must have been so different. And I don't think it would have happened without that collaboration on both parts.
Exactly. If we were to compare the other missionaries that we had previously mentioned on our other episodes, like Mary Scranton and Henry Ebenzeller, they focused a lot on Western-style education. And although for Horace Allen eventually did set up the first medical institute, his other achievements was bringing the influence of Western-style medicine and establishing the first hospital, Gwangheywon.
I especially admire his actions to decrease the discrimination in class and sexes at the hospital. I really felt his sympathy for humanity in that. I think that his doctor side was very well expressed as he ran the hospital, but his humanitarian side was really expressed as he gave those services in multiple different ways.
And as we continue to talk about, the actions that Horus did, it's his mindset, right? We talked about the beginning, as a missionary, I think that probably gave him a strong backbone of why he is so willing to help others. And with those achievements, after, having that goal originally of trying to be a missionary and spreading Christianity, and then being able to build their own hospital, then medical institution, what do you think about his mindset, from back then?
I really appreciate his ability to draw such a fine line between his passion and ambition with his missionary work and his diplomacy. Right. Separation of church and state is one of the biggest issues we face even in our modern world right now. And especially because he was so passionate about both subjects, it must have been very hard for him to separate them and approach them as different entities. the fact that he was able to prioritize and lay aside one ambition to focus on the more important issue at hand, that being his diplomacy and his medical goals rather than his missionary goals, must be a large reason for why he was able to succeed to such levels.
Yeah, it's interesting because no matter what his output was, what he ended up doing, it's still kind of all connected. It's basically just helping the people, right?
Right.
Helping the people, hoping that in the beginning, spreading Christianity will give people peace of mind, something to believe in, something to, during those times it was very dark for Korea. So this was giving hope. And then being able to make advances in medical technology also was, the whole goal was to help other people.
Right.
This whole episode, not only are we talking about Horace Allen's achievements, but his mindset. And it's amazing to have you, Holly, here with us this morning to talk about all of that, including Gwangheywon, which is now the current Yonsei Severance Hospital.
Well, I think Horace, with him trying to work for these different institutions without compensation really showed a lot of character that we should even try to exemplify now. As a foreigner myself, I'm very aware of the opportunities that lie outside of Korea, which in a lot of ways comes so much easier than advancement here.
Right.
So I think it really shows his passion, rather than a desire to climb a social or economic ladder. I think that his choices, especially knowing the opportunities that must have been there for him in his home country, must have been really big, especially bringing his family over here. So, even when he was a diplomat, I don't think his views changed a lot,
Right.
He always tried to serve people equally and fairly, which I think is very admirable.
I think if we touch lightly on his diplomatic actions, a lot of it was trying to get the U.S. influence into Korea to help them serve equality for the Commonwealth, right? In that transition, you had the king, royal family, the scholars, and then common people. So using the influence of American support, what he wanted to do as a diplomat was making sure they had the right resources, like you said, outside of Korea, and being able to help them.
Right, especially during that time where Korea wasn't yet a diplomatic powerhouse, first world country like it is today.
It's very different.
The struggles and issues that he was facing at that time were so much different than what we can see Korea as today. So I think that, again, going back to that collaboration with Kim Go-jong and Allen was so influential, not just for medicine and education, but for civilization progressing to where it is today, which, looking at Korea now is
so, to wrap this up, I just can't imagine if Horace Allen could see Korea now.
Yes.
It would be completely different, right? I don't think he would ever have imagined Korea to be this advanced in not only just, medicine, but in a whole various fields, right? IT, just development in politics.
Architecture.
Amazing. And
absolutely,
I want to thank you again, Holly, for being with us today and discussing about Horace Allen's achievement, King Go-jong, along with Gwangheywon. And for today's episode, part 3, Human Library, discussing about Horace Allen and his achievements. I hope everyone enjoyed today's MIKU Podcast. Melt into Korea with us. Next week, we will be joined by a new guest and new topics. So stay tuned and stay safe. Thank you. Bye.